Tonight's slate for MLB DFS could be classified as being top-heavy. And if you're doing like a single-entry tournament lineup, that doesn't matter. You just take the one pitcher that you like and you go from there. But for me, I'm trying to do multi-entry for tournaments, and that means usually I need to find multiple pitchers I want to use. That can lead to some tricky decisions for tonight, not just picking which other pitchers I want to use, but also deciding how heavy to go on the guy who I like for this specific slate. So a unique slate in that sense, where we have essentially one shining star pitcher and then a couple of guys in consideration beyond that, which does change our dynamic, at least from a multi-entry perspective. So let's dive in now and figure out how to play this thing. Welcome on into the solo shot. That's right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and numberFire.com. My name is Jim Sonis. I am a senior writer and analyst for numberFire.com, here to break down tonight's 11-game main slate. With lock set for 7:05 for tonight, there is only one weather note on this slate. That is at Yankee Stadium for the Yankees and the Rays. Winds are blowing in from right at 10 miles per hour there. I would downgrade hitters a bit, but I wouldn't go overboard. Just a little bit of a wind. That does impact things, but still not a situation where we need to overreact. So slight downgrade to bats there. Everything else pretty much status quo for tonight. As a reminder, a lot of good stuff going down right now on the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed. Later today, we will have our PGA DFS podcast with myself and Brandon Gadula breaking down the Tour Championship, which is this week in the PGA, starting on Friday as opposed to Thursday because of Labor Day weekend. So a couple extra days to enter lineups. It's a unique format with golfers opening the event with strokes already in their favor. So a lot to dissect. We'll break that down later today, both on the DFS feed and on the FanDuel YouTube page. We also have the Daily ISO and the Daily Deke with Tom Vecchio breaking down NHL and NBA DFS. We have our NASCAR podcast coming up on Thursday, and starting next week, the Heat Check NFL podcast is back, getting you set for week number 1. So make sure you are subscribed to the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed wherever you get your podcasts. Also, the NFL podcast will be streamed live on YouTube. So make sure you are subscribed to the FanDuel YouTube page to get that, along with our daily Q&A shows at 4 p.m. Eastern, getting you set for that day's MLB DFS slate. The NBA playoffs are back in full swing, and FanDuel has you covered. Compete in the Mountain Dew NBA Free Play daily from now through September 7th for your chance to win your seat in a virtual event with NBA legends Gary Payton and Ray Allen. With each entry, you will also be entered into the King of the Mountain 3-point bonus for your chance to win a share of $15,000, brought to you by Mountain Dew, official sponsor of the NBA. For more details, visit FanDuel.com or download the FanDuel app today. Eligibility restrictions apply. Pitching preview for this Tuesday main slate. Aaron Nola is that shining pinnacle for today. He is $10,200 on FanDuel. Not all that expensive, honestly. Framber Valdez is $9,900. Zach Plesac back from AAA is $9,700. I guess the alternate site. Patrick Corbin is $96,000. Ian Anderson is $9,000. Then Dallas Keuchel and John Lester are the others at $8,000 or higher. And Nola is going to be the guy who is the focus for me for tonight. I did get hyped on Nola 2 starts ago, and I was discussing why we should be willing to buy into the small sample dominance on Nola, and he got rocked. He allowed 4 runs over 2 2/3 innings. That's not great, and it hurt for sure to have Nola in my lineups that night, but I'm going right back here again tonight. And the big reason is that it didn't seem to be a major issue that caused him to have those issues in that start. The velocity was fine. He was still able to throw his off-speed stuff. Those are kind of 2 things that can be signals where something may be amiss. If their velocity is down, or if pitchers aren't able to throw their off-speed pitches, that can be a warning sign that maybe they're not at full health. But Nola was fine there, and he did bounce back in his start after that. He had 8 strikeouts across 7 innings while allowing just 2 earned runs. And that start was against the same Nationals team he is facing tonight. That means that they did just see him, which is a bit of a concern here. But now Nola gets to go back home. And that's actually a pretty big thing for him, because Nola mopped up in his first 4 starts, all of which were in Philadelphia. His strikeout rate was 4 percentage points higher at home last year than it was on the road. It's also not the worst matchup either. The Nationals have a 93 WRC plus against righties this year, so below average. They get very few fly balls, so they do have some individual good hitters, but the lineup as a whole is not necessarily one that we need to fear. The outing 2 starts ago was rough for Nola, and, they are familiar with him now. So those are 2 downsides, but I still think Nola is the focal point of tonight's slate. If you're going single entry for DFS, just lock in Nola and go from there. And we'll talk about how to handle him in multi-entry, but it's hard to find alternatives. So you're probably going to wind up going pretty, or at least I will, wind up going pretty heavy on Nola in that situation. But this is the solo shot, so we have to talk about 2 other pitchers, so we can't just say use Aaron Nola and log out. So let's look at some alternatives here at pitcher. I was very much not in on Framber Valdez to open in the season, and now seeing him at $9,900 is daunting. He had a 5.86 ERA last year between the rotation and the bullpen with a 4.75 Sierra. So it's not as if he had bad luck. He just wasn't pitching all that well. And that didn't provide a lot of reason for hope. I still think there is some shakiness in the numbers for Valdez this year, but for right now, I am willing to use him even with that salary being $9,900. Valdez has made 6 appearances this year. One of those was in relief, but he did throw 80 pitches there, so effectively a start from a length perspective. In that time, Valdez looked good at 3.24 skill interactive ERA with a 26% strikeout rate and just a 6% walk rate. And Valdez has done that, upping his strikeout rate, lowering his walk rate while still getting ground balls. The ground balls make a lot of sense because Valdez has fully leaned into throwing his sinker a bunch, and that thing gets a ton of ground balls. But I think the bigger key, outside of leaning into the sinker, is that he's ditched his four-seam fastball because that was a really bad pitch for Valdez last year. So he has thrown it just 1.8% of the time this year, according to Baseball Savant, and we are seeing the dividends of that. The problem with Valdez, and this is why I can't put him in the same tier as Nola, is that the sinker just doesn't get whiffs. His swing and strike rate overall this year is 9.7%. That means his strikeout rate will come down from where it's currently at 26%. It just might not happen tonight because he's facing the Rangers. And the Rangers have a 25% strikeout rate against lefties with a 71 WRC plus. They never draw walks. So if we're talking long-term, I would bet on regression for Valdez in a lot of matchups. This is not one of those matchups where I think the regression is going to come specifically here. So I think that eventually Valdez will come back to earth. I don't think that will happen tonight. So even though his salary is higher than it should be, I think we can roll him out here at $9,900. And I think that he is going to be the number 2 pitcher for me behind Aaron Nola for tonight. But there is a pretty massive gap between the two of them. And honestly, there's a gap between Nola and Valdez, but there's also a gap between Valdez and the rest of the pack. In things to watch, we will have 2 pitchers I would like if it weren't for concerns around pitch counts. Maybe you want to use them and hope they go deeper in the games. And I think that because I have those concerns, it's going to force us, as we did with Valdez, to allocate a bit more salary than we'd like on a pitcher. And that guy is Ian Anderson. Anderson is $9,000, and it's his second start in the big leagues. I don't want to, allot $9,000 in salary to a guy making his second career start. But Anderson probably is the third-ranked pitcher on this slate, all things considered. There are no length concerns here. He went 6 innings and 90 pitches in his debut. Could be stretched out even more this time around. And Anderson did look pretty good. He had 6 strikeouts compared to 2 walks in that start while allowing just 1 hit. So a really good debut for Anderson. Honestly, you could have expected this. I had some concerns around the walk rate for sure, but he did get a lot of strikeouts, was spending most of the last year at AA, 32% strikeout rate. So eventually the walks could come back and be a major concern. And that's why, again, I can't put him as high as Nola or Valdez. But it's also the age 22 season for Anderson. It is very reasonable to expect some progression here, and he seemed to show that in his debut, keeping the walks in check, getting strikeouts, and being effective overall. This time, Anderson is facing the Red Sox. They got rid of Mitch Moreland at the deadline. The active roster now has an 85 WRC plus against righties and a 25% strikeout rate. So that is a good matchup for a righty. So I am willing to use Anderson here. I do think, though, again, that this slate is very top-heavy at pitcher. Nola, to me, is the clear focal point. His salary is pretty easy to get to at 10-2. Like, we're going to talk about a Coors game. I think you can stack that team in Coors while using Nola as your pitcher. Then, to me, I think it's very tiered after that, where Nola's in a tier by himself, Valdez in a tier by himself, and then Anderson would be number 3 on that list. If I have one lineup, I am locking in Aaron Nola with 0 questions asked. If I have 10 lineups, then I think I'm probably doing like 6 or 7 Nola, doing 1 Anderson, and then the rest Valdez. So either 2 or 3 Valdez compared to 6 or 7 Nola. So to me, it's really all about Aaron Nola for tonight. Valdez and Anderson are at least in consideration, but I really do think that unless you're doing 10 or so lineups, I would just focus on Aaron Nola and then differentiate with your stacks. And honestly, that's okay because the stacks are really good for tonight. There are 5 legitimate stacks I could have included within the stacking section as being my favorites for tonight. So let's start things off here at Coors Field because we've been stacking against Jon Gray all season long. And a big part of that has been the decreased velocity for Gray. That velocity did go back up in his most recent start, and it might have been his best start of the season. He went 6 innings. He allowed just 1 earned run, so that could mean that Gray is turning things around. But I am still willing to consider the Giants against him in Coors Field tonight. First, let's talk about that velocity for Jon Gray because it was 95.1 miles per hour. That was his best for the entire season, up about a full mile per hour from where he's been at in his previous starts. That's very good. But that's still down from his average of 96.1 miles per hour last year. It also came in a situation super conducive to high velocity because that game was in Arizona and they had the roof open for that game. So first pitch temperature there was 107 degrees. Velocity goes up in high temperatures, and those were super, super high. So you expect the velocity to be higher, and it was. Despite that, it still was not as high as it was last year. Now, Gray goes back to Coors Field, where it's in the upper 70s for today. If his velocity comes back down, he could get in trouble, especially with this game being at Coors Field. So if you gave me this matchup between Gray and the Giants at Coors a week ago, and I hadn't seen Gray perform as well as he did in Arizona, I would be much higher on this one than I am right now. But there are reasons to think that even with the slight degree of uncertainty, that start may not have been fully legit. So I am okay with the Giants here, just not quite as high on them as I would have been 1 week ago. It does help here that they didn't really do much at the trade deadline, so we can't expect the usual players to be in there for the Giants. Alex Dickerson probably going to bat second. He's $3,200. Not the best results this year, but his peripherals are good enough to buy in. I would assume that Pablo Sandoval should bat 6th again. He's not in the assumed lineup on FanDuel, but he's hit there the past couple of days. He's another guy we can trust at $2,600 despite poor results. So I think that the Giants, definitely a team we can turn to for today, despite the fact that Jon Gray did show some life his most recent time out. Outside of Coors Field, and I can understand if you want to avoid the Giants for tonight, given that they are the Giants and given that Gray did show life, there are other really good options. So let's give you some alternatives here to Coors Field. It sounds like the Royals are going to give Matt Harvey one last spin in the rotation. He's facing Cleveland tonight, so we are going to stack Cleveland. The first 2 starts for Harvey have not gone that well. 11.12 ERA in 2 outings. It's not great, and there's no real reason to believe that will change because it's a very small sample, but the peripherals are in line. 5.49 skill interactive ERA with a 9.3% swinging strike rate. Almost everything against Harvey is being hit super hard. The velocity is in line with where it was last year, so it's not like he's gotten a major tick there. The only change we've seen with Harvey is that the gap between his changeup and his fastball has gotten a bit bigger. That's a good thing. We definitely want that. But it hasn't been good enough to curtail the bad results yet. I really doubt this experiment lasts too much longer, and I would not be shocked to see Cleveland put the nail in the coffin here. So definitely think that Cleveland is going to be a solid option for tonight. This is a different Cleveland offense than we've seen the entire season because there were changes to them at the trade deadline. They DFA'd my heartthrob, Domingo Santana, so he's gone, but they did bring in Josh Naylor. Naylor is $2,400. I would expect him to start in left field for Cleveland going forward, and Naylor, the sample's pretty small this year because he hasn't played a ton, but if we go back to last year against righties, he did have a 43% hard hit rate, so that definitely helps. The ground ball rate for Naylor was too high, and that was true in the minors too. So once his salary rises, I will probably back off of Naylor and allow that ground ball rate to push me elsewhere. But, he's $2,400. He's in a lineup that I want to stack, and I would like to be able to get to Francisco Lindor or Jose Ramirez, and he helps me get there. So I would say go to Naylor, go to Tyler Naquin, assuming that he's back in there. Those two together should allow you to get to the higher salaried guys within this lineup, and I would like to do so for tonight. So stacking against Matt Harvey once again with Cleveland's offense and using some of their new pieces. Similar to John Gray, who we talked about earlier, I am still monitoring the velocity on Michael Fulmer because Fulmer is coming off a long injury, and you would expect things to eventually click for him. But they haven't gotten there yet. Unlike Gray, we have not seen that pop start yet for Fulmer, and it's going to force us to stack the Brewers against him tonight. Fulmer's had 5 starts so far this year, and they haven't been long stints. His max is 63 pitches, but the velocity still has not budged. He has a 5.47 skill interactive ERA with a 16% strikeout rate. He has done that while letting up a 48% hard hit rate. The strikeout rate being low is a key for John Gray. The Brewers still have a 28% strikeout rate against righties, so they are striking out a lot. They can make hard contact, but they're just not making contact enough. So facing a lower strikeout pitcher is a big crutch for them, and they do get that here. I think we need to keep on stacking against Fulmer. I would love to see him turn a corner because he was really fun back in the day, but we haven't gotten a reason for that type of optimism yet. So I think it's necessary to load up on batters facing him and see what happens. The Brewers have had some changes in their lineup recently. They moved Luis Urias into their leadoff spot, and he hasn't done much against righties. He has a 29% hard hit rate and an 11% fly ball rate in a small sample. He can get the occasional steal, but it's not as if he's, some machine in that sense. So I think you could justify Luis Urias, but personally, I'm not sure that I can, despite the fact he has a low salary. He's probably going to bat leadoff on a team that I want to stack. I don't think that's enough for me to get fully invested. I would look for value elsewhere. Like Justin Smoke's batting a little bit lower in the order. He could go there. Jed Jerko hasn't played a bunch against righties, but he's had good numbers. So if Jed Jerko were to start for today, I could go there. Avisail Garcia. I think I would look elsewhere for my value within this Brewers stack outside of Luis Urias. So probably someone I'm going to avoid, even though from a process perspective of him batting high in the order and being cheap makes sense. I don't think I'm going to get there today, despite that. Let's finish up with things to watch and go back to Coors Field because we did not talk about the Rockies. They're facing Kevin Gausman, and it would have been really fun a month ago to use the Rockies against Gausman, but Gausman has made gains by leaning more on what's being classified at pitch info as a changeup. It depends on the source you look at, but they're classifying it as a changeup. And in the 5 starts with more of that pitch, whatever it may be, Gausman has a 33% strikeout rate and a 6% walk rate. Still a 4.28 ERA, so he's not been lights out, but he's faced the Dodgers twice in that span. He's faced the A's in that time, and the Rockies are not on that level. Now, one of those starts is against the Rockies at Coors. They did score a couple runs against him, but I think I'm okay avoiding the Rockies here with Gausman being on the bump and showing some pretty major gains recently. So if you want to go to Coors, I would say go Giants and be okay avoiding the Rockies. Pitch count concerns are pushing me lower on 2 guys for tonight. Mentioned that earlier. There were some guys who I would like, if not for pitch counts. Those guys are Zach Plesac. The other one is Josh Lindblom. Both of them have good matchups. Plesac is facing the Royals. Lindblom gets the Tigers. And Plesac, coming off of his discipline for violating the COVID-19 protocols, he's been at the alternate site for a while now. I'm guessing he's been pitching there, but we also don't know if he's still fully stretched out. So I don't know what the pitch count will be for Plesac. It could still be really high, but I don't honestly know if that's going to be true. Lindblom has been pitching all year, which hasn't gotten a full leash in the Brewers. He has not exceeded 90 pitches or 5 innings yet in those starts. So if you think Lindblom could go deeper in the game, I think he's interesting. He's getting a lot of strikeouts and he's facing a bad offense. But I'll be wary of both these guys until I see where their pitch counts are. So for me, no Plesac and no Lindblom for this slate, despite the fact that pitching is pretty rough. As far as other stacks go, 2 other places I would stack are the Braves and the Astros. Braves are facing Ryan Weber, who's going back into the rotation here for the Red Sox. He still has as many walks as strikeouts this year, despite spending a lot of time in the bullpen. So the Braves are highly desirable as a stack. I would again consider Adam Duvall, Austin Riley, and Nick Markakis as value options. I would not think they'll bat as high as they did. We could see if Acuna gets back in there, or Travis d'Arnaud will probably play again. So I wouldn't expect them to be as high in the order as they were last night, but could still be value options. The Astros are facing Jordan Lyles. He is coming in after Luis Garcia, who will open the game for the Rangers. Lyles has been pretty rough and he's been rough enough where his manager speculated that he was tipping pitches after his most recent start. So that's probably not a great sign. So the Astros, good option here despite facing the opener. Carlos Correa, Yuli Gurriel, and Michael Brantley are all $3,000 or lower. I especially love Correa there. I've had a lot of Correa this year. Going to keep on doing it at $3,000. Think it just makes too much sense. So honestly, from a stacking perspective, like I said, there are 5 legitimate teams you could stack. So to me, that means you focus on Nola and then rotate through your stacks. You want to keep it tight as you can, but that's where your differentiation should be, is within your stacks rather than in your pitchers, because Nola is just the top end guy for tonight. I think honestly, if I'm ranking the stacks, I say it's hard to say that the Astros and Braves are even that much below the other ones. So although they were in things to watch rather than the stacks, I still think they are really good options, and they're right on par with Cleveland and Milwaukee. So if you love the Braves, want to pump them up, I will not push back at all. And I think that all these teams are good options for this slate. That is all the time that we have for today. As always, though, a reminder to come back here at 4 p.m. Eastern Time and check us out on the FanDuel YouTube, Twitch, and Facebook pages. There we'll be answering questions from 4 until 4:25 p.m. Eastern. We can talk pitchers, we can talk process, we can talk stacks, one-offs, whatever it may be. We will be there from 4 to 4:25 to answer your questions and get you set for tonight's slate. We also have the PGA podcast coming up later today, 10 a.m. Eastern on the FanDuel YouTube page, so make sure you're subscribed there, but also subscribe to the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed wherever you get your podcasts, and if you like what you hear, leave us a rating and review as well. If you have questions for me prior to 4 p.m., I am on Twitter at Jim Sannes, JimSannes. You can also follow the FanDuel Podcast Network at FanDuel Podcasts. Big thank you to Calvin Theobald, our video producer, from the video side of things here today. Thank you, Cal, as always. And thank you to everyone for tuning in. Good luck with your MLB DFS lineups for tonight. And we'll talk to you once again tomorrow. This has been the solo shot right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network.